Welcome to Whitetail Wisdom, brought to you by ConQuest Sense, with your host, the Deer Professor, Doug Roberts.
Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to Whitetail Wisdom. I'm your host, Doug Roberts from ConQuest Sense. My wife, Karen, and I own ConQuest Sense, ConQuest Deer Farm. I'd like to welcome my co-host, Duran Martinez from Wild Michigan Radio. Today's topic, we actually want to talk about bucks coming out of velvet. We want to talk about there's different types of rubs, and then we want to actually talk about scrapes. You know, as we look towards fall, I think it's kind of important to see and understand what are these bucks doing, and can we even pattern them during that time? What's your thoughts?
That's a good question, because and everybody knows, everybody that's ever had a trail cam out there knows that, I've been watching this one all year. All of a sudden, poof, they're gone.
They're gone. They're
absolutely gone. And that, to me, was one of the most frustrating things, because I didn't understand where they've been here all summer. They've been growing. We've been watching the antler growth. They've been hitting the mineral or the food plot areas that we've managed all year long, not just, like 2 weeks before season. Okay. Yep. This isn't bear hunting. Yep. You need to manage this stuff year long with mineral, with plots, whatever, to keep them in those areas. But again, Doug, this is where you come in. You are the wisdom behind the whitetails. Where do they go? Because we've been watching them for so long, and this is in velvet, this is in velvet. All of a sudden, where'd they go?
Well, you understand, all summer long as they're growing their antlers, they are in bachelor groups. They're hanging together. And you'll always find a dominant buck will always buddy up with a non-dominant buck, a younger buck, because that younger buck is the sacrificial lamb to that dominant buck. I mean, literally, the dominant buck is going to let him go out into the food plot first. He's going to let him walk down the trails first. And unfortunately, most hunters haven't completely figured this out, because that first buck, which might be a nice 2-year-old, some areas 3-year-old, it's one of the biggest bucks anyone's seen, so they shoot it. Now you just educated that dominant buck that's standing back there 30 yards waiting, going, aha, see, it would have been me had I not. So now he's going to go find another
spot,
another guy, another buck, to take that place. But they also commune together. And most hunters don't understand that. They take care of each other. Deer groom each other. Now, some people take that as kind of like a negative thought process, but it's not. Think about it. A deer cannot clean itself from its shoulders up. Doesn't have the ability. It has to have another deer help. But that's a whole nother topic we're getting into. So let's go back to this is where my brain goes. Okay, you kick my brain in gear going. So let's go. What makes the shedding process happen? So if we look at a buck, what happens is the testosterone level starts to go up in that deer's system. And as it goes up, it starts to constrict the arteries in the antler and starts to shut the blood flow down. So as that blood flow starts to shut down, it starts to shrink. The velvet starts to shrink and dry up and tightens. And what it does, what we really believe it does, is it starts to itch and create pressure. Those deer can still feel that through the antler, the bucks can, and they're uncomfortable, and so they want to start rubbing it off. And here on the farm, it's very interesting, because we can find bucks that are very sensitive to the itch, and they start rubbing, and they'll start rubbing some of the tines down, and then it'll get into where the blood flow is still there, and now it starts to hurt, so they stop. And then they have to wait for that constriction. But it's the testosterone levels rising in their system. We now know that testosterone, as it rises, starts to produce the semen that they're going to need for the breeding cycle, during the rut. So once that's all done and they start to shed that off, I've had people go, well, how come you never find the velvet out in the woods? They eat it. They try to eat all of it. What we're thinking and what we really believe over time is that triggers their immune system into a higher, more healthy level, and it helps the testosterone to kick in. It just builds their body up, and that is when, like you just brought up, they all of a sudden kind of separate from each other. They go find their own little area, and they start preparing themselves for the rut. And that's when you see them on the trail camera, and the next day you don't. Because it only can take them 10 to 15 minutes to rub all the velvet off. Some will take up to 2-3 days. Most of them, literally son of the gun, which is, right behind you here.
Right.
I watched him when he was a 3-year-old. He literally had every bit of velvet tore off in 8 minutes.
Wow.
Done, gone. And the brush pile he tore in to do it, it took me probably half a day to pick that sucker up. He had it blown everywhere. And that's when I really learned, like, oh my gosh, how fast and aggressive they can do this. And then he ate it. It was all stringy. And he'd flip his head and grab it and pull it off. And I'm like, it's amazing. And so now we've watched numerous ones on the farm over the years do it. So that's the process of the shedding and how it happens. Now, when they shed, they make rubs. And I always sit and you've asked me this question. You said, okay, I see these rubs and they're on all these small trees. There's a whole bunch of them. I mean, that is where I've got to be hunting. No. That is where a buck went in. They find these flimsy, bendable stuff that's kind of gets caught in their antlers and their tines, and they're ripping that velvet loose, and they're making all these rubs trying to clean their velvet up, and that's the only time they're going to be there. It's just rubs that create the velvet process of coming off. Now we're talking about older bucks. If we're talking about spikes and little 4 points, which we see in Michigan every now and then, those are the big trees that they pick on all the time. So we're talking about, 3-year-old, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old bucks.
You've got a picture here in the office of a buck with the velvet draping down, but yet you see that red. Where it's still kind of alive, the tissue's kind of alive. And now it all kind of makes sense as to why we're seeing it hanging but not completely off, why they're not taking it all off, is because, there's still live nerve endings in there. And then to have them eat it triggers something internally, which has happened for as long as deer have been around, but we're just now starting to understand. This is, again, we're living full time with these. People can say they want about high fence facilities and whatnot, okay, but there is an education that benefits not only you, but it benefits hunters and to better understand what they're doing. Despite they're in a fence, they're still wild. They're not house pets, and to maybe help our departments of natural resources and whatnot better understand what's happening in the wild also, because they can't monitor deer 24/7. They can get an estimate from a plane as to how many are out in this area, or drive around and do rough counts and have ideas then, but to physically see everything 24/7, that takes somebody like you.
Well, it's exactly right. We see it 24/7. Interestingly, the DNR does have their own fenced facility that they do some of their own studies in. A lot of the universities now have their own captive deer herd, because we've all realized if there's not one whitetail hunter, I don't care how professional you are, and we know a lot of really, really top-notch professional whitetail hunters, they are not around deer when you look at the number of days and hours that we are. And so just by default, we're going to learn more about the deer and the process. Again, we were talking about rubs. What a lot of people don't understand is there's really 3 distinct types of rubs. And I've said that to people, and they're like, no, there's rubs. And I'm like, no, there's 3 distinct types, and they're all for a certain purpose. So the first one is literally, as we just said, it's the shedding of the velvet. It's getting the velvet off. It's polishing up the antlers. It's preparing the body. The second type of rub, and you can kind of pick up on these because when you look at the tree, the rub is only on one side. That is what I call the neck strengthening, the rut preparing rub. Now this rub is based on the size of the tree, based on the age of the deer and the size of the antlers. Now, we've seen some that are, on 5-inch trees. That's a mature buck. I mean, it's going to be a 3-year-old or older. I can just tell you that because he's going to have the antlers of that size. But what he's doing is he's working on one spot, and he's strengthening the muscles in his neck. He's preparing his shoulders for a fight. He's getting used to all the twists and turns, just like we would have to get ready and prepare and get in shape if we were to play a sport.
Right.
They're doing the same thing, and it's very noticeable because it's the one spot. Now, what's interesting about these rubs is that buck will come back to that same rub a number of times early in the fall, before the pre-rut and rut starts. He has his favorite trees. Mm-hmm. That tree, he may have a couple of them in throughout his route, but he will come back to it 2 or 3 times to work on strengthening. Also remember, as their testosterone levels are going up, their frustration levels are going up as well with that, because they're now getting closer and closer to wanting to breed does, and they're getting frustrated because it's not time yet. And so they're using that tree and that rub is to release some of that stress. So it's a multiple purpose, but you always can tell them because they're only on one side of a tree. Let's go to the third type.
Here comes the third, right?
This is the third one. This is the one that every hunter is going to be looking for. It's the one that is all the way around a tree. He's marking a territory. This is my territory, and I don't care where all you other bucks are at. No matter where you're at, you are going to see this rub. A lot of times you'll find them by scrapes, because this, I'm going to check this area. This is my pattern that I'm going to come through. And if you start finding those, pay attention to it, or create mock scrapes next to it, because now you're going to have him starting to check that area. So again, if we look at rubs, there's 3 different types. The first one, velvet shedding. Second one, I call it the strengthening or the frustration rub. And then we've got the rut rub. This is the one that they're marking the territory and going, boys, the girls in this area are mine. Mm-hmm. I'm marking it. This is it. And I'm going to maintain, and I'm going to do this travel route. That one is actually able to be used for hunting.
Now, you said with scrapes, it will probably be around there. Now, I know that deer maintain scrapes year-round. Is this scrape just going to be where he's marking this territory?
3 types of scrapes.
Here we go.
Okay, so there, and you just said the one that most people don't understand, and I still don't. I can't say I have 100% grasp of it, but it's scrapes that are kind of taken care of all year long. You'll see them even use them in the summer. It's almost like a ground marking spot for deer, not just the bucks, but the does. You don't see them very often, but we do see them. As you get in towards fall, when the bucks are working on their, what I call their strengthening or frustration rubs, what you see is you'll see scrapes in the middle of fields, or you'll see them, 1, 2, 3 in a row. But what happens is the buck will stop and he'll paw and make the scrape all from one direction. So all the dirt is thrown in one place. That's a frustration scrape. He's simply going through that area. He stops and he just paws the ground and just kicks the dirt backwards, and then he walks a little further and he makes it, boom. He's never coming back to those.
Okay. Those
are strictly just, he's stopping, he's frustrated, he needs something to do. He needs to get rid of some energy, and it's just, I'm just scraping, I'm throwing the dirt back, and I'm walking on. What hunters are looking for is that third type, and that is where a scrape is, the dirt is thrown all directions, and there's a licking branch.
Right.
The frustration scrape, you'll never see a licking branch. It's in open areas. And I have hunters that always call and say, hey, man, I saw, 3 or 4 or 5 scrapes. And I said, well, is all the dirt being thrown in one direction? Does it have a licking branch? No, don't worry about it. The deer's not coming back.
And that's hard. That's that, because you know how excited we get.
It's a huge sign.
It's a big sign that there's big deer around here, but it's just passing through.
He's literally just passing through. It's not that he's marking a territory. When you get to the scrape that the dirt is thrown in all directions and it has a licking branch, he's doing a few things here. One, he's setting his territory. He's setting his travel route according to that. That will normally be somewhere around that rub that is all the way around the tree, because he wants every buck to know that this is my area. And he's preparing it for the does to come to. And if he's the dominant buck, he's waiting for the dominant doe to choose him. Another fallacy. The bucks don't choose the does. The doe chooses the buck for breeding. So if it's done properly, the dominant doe should be the first one that comes into heat in that area, in that family group, and she wants to be bred by the dominant buck. Nature says the best survive.
Sure.
And so if I'm the dominant doe in the group, I want to be bred by the dominant buck, and my offspring should be as strong or literally more superior than what we are, and so our genetics carries on. Go ahead.
Now, see, you've got me going, when I'm thinking dominant doe, is this an age thing? Is this a size thing? How do they determine pecking order in that respect? Because that's something on the way here to do these shows, that was something that came to my mind. Look, young ones are, they're going to probably come later into their cycle, but to establish dominance in does, that's kind of a new thing for me, I guess.
Well, okay, so every hunter, I guarantee you, has experienced the dominant doe blow up or syndrome or dysfunction. And that is where that doe comes in, creates all kinds of havoc, pins you out, blows all the deer out of there, and you're just frustrated because you're waiting for that buck to come in. It's like that same doe comes in and keeps busting everything up. Well, that's the dominant doe. She controls everything. Here's what you have to understand. Wherever you hunt whitetails, there's going to be at least 2 family groups of whitetail deer there in that area. They breed within their own family. That's called line breeding. And then they crossbreed each other, and that strengthens the genetic backing of both groups. Well, there's a dominant doe in each group, but that doesn't mean there's 2 dominant bucks in the area. So
right.
Those 2 will tell everyone, I need to be bred first by him. And he'll try to do both, but even those 2 does, one will be dominant over the other. One family group will be more dominant than the other. Now, here's the secret, and this is what we found out on the deer farms. If we remove that dominant doe, let's say she's 5, 6, 7 years old, if we remove her from the area, her daughter is next in line and moves up. Now, let's say that daughter's only 3. There's a sister that's 1.5 turning 2, which she's ready to breed. If we even get rid of that 3-year-old doe and we move the dominant doe down to that 1.5 turning 2, and she gets bred by the dominant buck, remember the genetic. If the dominant do it, the offspring should be better.
Mm-hmm.
The further we move that genetic potential down in a younger age, the faster our genetics multiply within that deer herd. Everyone wonders why we're growing these monster 200-inch, 240-inch typicals at 2 and 3 years old on this farm. We figured out the family hierarchy. No doe on this farm, unless we call her a super doe, ever breeds after 3 years old. We're breeding the younger daughters, which are genetically superior. If we put the right buck with the right doe, the daughter is better than the mom. So why wouldn't we breed the daughter as soon as we possibly can and make the mom obsolete?
So you seriously saw the light bulb go off in my head, right? Because when you said you could take that out and move the genetics up faster, I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this is a question I've had for years, but never knew how to ask.
Well,
and you just answered it.
Right. And see, everyone, wow, that dominant doe, though, is the one producing twins. And it's like, yeah, but so will her daughter. And then that other daughter that's younger. Hunters have to understand is when you call out and you manage a deer herd, call from the older, the top end. They try to do it with the bucks all the time because they want the antlers.
Sure.
It's more important with the does. What we have found is the does will produce 60 to 70% of the genetic pass down to the offspring. Sorry, guys, we aren't real powerful.
Right.
Genetically, we're just not the top of the heap. The does are. The females are. So, again, if we can take out the dominant doe and we can lower the age group of the family groups in our area, believe it or not, it allows the younger stuff to become bigger, stronger at earlier ages. And so, again, our deer farms are proving this to be scientifically correct.
Now, you know in your heart that 50% of the people paying attention to this right now have either thrown their hands up, called you a liar or are screaming at you saying, no, that's not how you do it. You leave the big old doe to breed because she's been there for so long.
Let me throw something else.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
I understand that. So there was a small group of us that watched 4 or 5 farms again, and we started monitoring buck and doe fawns being produced by the age of the doe. So in other words, we were literally 2-year-olds, first-time moms giving birth, then to 3, 4, 5. I think we even went to 6. And we went back through the records basically roughly 10 years. And what we started to find was that the does that were 3 years old, 3.5 years old, and younger produced more buck fawns than doe fawns. 4 and up produced more doe fawns than buck fawns. Now, it was only a 2 to 3% difference. But when we look at the mathematics of 2 to 3% in the deer population, it's huge when it's multiplied over 3-4 years. So if you literally want more bucks over time in your area, you want to manage the food source in that area so everyone has it. Cull your doe herd down where the does are younger. They we now know, produce more buck fawns. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you got more bucks getting mature because you have more to select from. You have less does that have to be bred, so you keep the number of deer down and in check just by naturally doing it. Therefore, your food sources, especially your wintering habitat, can handle the amount of animals you have, and yet you have more bucks to hunt.
It makes sense. I mean, it makes sense. Again, you don't have to convince me, okay? Because I've been working with you for the past 20 years with that other show, with my show, that, I've learned to trust what you have developed, over those years. Yeah. And again, and I'm speaking from the perspective of Michigan mentality. I'm just going to call it that. Mm-hmm. That this is how we've always done it, and this is how it's going to stay, and I'm not going to change. Well, there has to be some change if you want things to get better.
I have to be honest. I have not yet met a whitetail hunter in Michigan or anywhere that does not want to truly improve his hunting quality, the herd management process. What I run into is people that really struggle making some major changes because it's so radical. Now, understand this little study that we did with buck fawns, doe fawns, and the age of the moms. That was just a small group of us. Now, this is just what we have found. Mm-hmm. And the information I've learned is just from the animals I'm around. It doesn't mean that somebody hasn't found something different in Texas.
Sure.
Or down in Georgia at the university. I mean, they have their own deer herd down there. But what I've learned and what we're finding out when we look at all this stuff is it seems to be holding true with what's happening on this farm, on the ranches that I work with and I consult for, and the wild deer herd out back. So it's not like we're just keeping this locked into a fenced situation. We're also working with it out back with a wild deer herd mm-hmm. here. And again, without baiting and feeding, you got to get into a whole lot of different styles of managing and keeping the deer in an area because we don't have a lot of area around here.
Right.
But we're now seeing 150s, 160s. A few years ago, I saw a 170 out back. You don't see those deer very often in Davison, Michigan.
No. So. Look, I've seen, and I showed you a picture of it, a monster, absolute monster buck that ran past me when I was on my lawnmower, on my tractor in my backyard. And when I take this photo and showed you, and you say, man, that's a big deer. Yeah. That's a big deer.
Well, especially for where you were at.
Oh, yeah, in Holt, Michigan. Right. Yeah. Which is I have 12 acres behind me that's not mine. I have an acre and a half. Yeah. But again, and it's suburban. It's that's a whole nother story there. It's a whole nother topic is urban deer and but It's because of low pressure, great bedding area, everything it needs.
A lot of food.
Lots of food.
Yeah.
And this is what we try to maintain outward is to give them their bedding areas. And not a lot of people have more than a couple acres.
Right.
And big deer can be taken on that small piece of property.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. But we're going to start to wrap this podcast up.
Okay.
But here's what we want to, I guess, take out of this and let everyone understand is when you look at the shedding process, that there's 3 types of rubs that you're going to run into out there in the fall. Understand what they mean and what they are and which ones should you hunt around or not worry about. And then we've also got the different types of scrapes that are happening because it is hard when you see
3 and 3. I mean,
when you see when you see all these scrapes all of a sudden out in the middle, it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, but it's all going one way and there's no licking branch, dude. Don't spend time.
There's
there.
nothing to keep it there.
There's nothing to keep that deer there. So understand what we've gone over there, and if you can apply some of those things, and then of course also the doe management side of it, you're going to have a much better, I think, hunting experience come fall. So
even a viewing experience.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if that's what you want, if that's being selective.
Well, again, that's a whole other topic of
Sure.
what kind of hunter are you? There's a lot of different hunters, but so what I'm hoping you as hunters can take from this is, especially with the scrapes, is that there's 3 types. And which one do you want to hunt over and which one should you hunt over? But we're coming out with a new product line, and it's called the EverCalm Scrape Rope Kit. Now, this is a hemp rope. It's 3 foot long, and you can attach it to a branch with a zip tie just the way it is, or you can actually loop it and make a loop and zip tie it like that and then slide it over a branch, and it simply hangs. And if you notice, we've kind of frayed the bottom of it, and a good friend here, Duran, is holding the EverCalm stick, and you simply just coat this whole thing and smear this whole thing full of the EverCalm wax formula. And what it does is the scent will actually absorb into the rope, and it's kind of neat as the wax slowly dries over time and deer come up and they start mixing that with their head, and the buck's rubbing on it. Even does will rub on this. The wax kind of breaks off and falls off, and they love that feeling. And so they work with it, but they leave their scent here. So all year long, this can be a community marking post, but in the fall, it actually becomes a licking branch for the bucks, and it's a marking spot. So again, this is the new EverCalm Scrape Rope Kit by ConQuest Scents. Look for it this fall in some of your local sporting goods stores, or go to ConQuestScents.com. Now, if you have questions or, again, topics you want to talk about, simply get them to us at media@ConQuestScents.com, and we will try to get them into one of the next podcasts that we do. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks for joining us today on Whitetail Wisdom Podcast. If you have any questions or topics, you can email us at media@ConQuestScents.com. Remember to hit that subscribe button and follow ConQuest Scents. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you're interested, we also have a live deer cam on the farm. You can watch it on our ConQuest Scents YouTube channel. Don't forget, you can purchase our products at ConQuestScents.com.